Okay, very good. So again, this is Tracee Swank, leading outreach to families and children and church and preschool combinations. Before we get started though, let's just pray and invite God and the Holy Spirit to be a part of our time together. Gracious and Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to be together today in this place. Thank you for all of the effort and work, the resources, the gifts, skills, and talents that have gone into bringing together this event. And for all of those here at this church, from the kids, from the school, to the church staff, all the volunteers who are just giving of their time to invest in other leaders. And so, Lord, we just thank you for this time. Lord, we thank you that we're back together again, even though some of us are still challenged with COVID and the challenges that still come with that. So, Lord, we just pray that your will be done, that in those places where COVID has had an impact and continues to be stressful and causing an impact on the ministry and the things that we do to serve you, Lord, that you just still control that, and you're in the middle of that, and you will carry us through all of that. So we pray for all of those who've been impacted by this pandemic. We also pray for the future of your church. Lord, we pray for families and kids and people who do not yet know you. We thank you for the awesome and amazing privilege it is to serve you as we deliver ministry and quality Christian education to kids and then also their families. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So if you have the app, and and I'm assuming you do, and you haven't done so yet, there's a poll. Oh, we have 2 more people attending, so now we're up to 112. I don't think there's 112 in the room, but okay. There's a poll that we posted, just 2 quick questions, and I'm going to share the poll results. So if you go in there, you can see that. Okay. So the first question was, what percentage of your preschool, school, or early childhood development center are already have a church home, your church or another church? And so we've got some results in there. We have more people. Good, answering, excellent. Oh, the numbers I love watching this. It's kind of fun. This is like kind of the lottery or something. But, that's really one of the things that we're going to talk about today, some of these best practices, and also how do we, think about our schools and our churches and the combination and that philosophy of ministry that we have with the families that are specifically in those preschools or schools or early childhood development centers. And so actually throughout this, when I say schools, we'll just say that's kind of like your blanket to cover all of those entities. But so you can see those results that are coming in on that question. The reason that we have that in here is that sometimes we get tripped up thinking, well, they're already in our school. If they already have a church home, maybe there's not a lot of outreach potential or opportunity there. But we're going to talk about how that's really not the case, that you shouldn't think that way about the folks that are already part of your school. And then the other question, how many times in a school year do your church members attend or participate in school or preschool activities beyond worship services? So a lot of times we'll schedule things, special things around Easter and Christmas, those kind of things, and we seem to have that bump in families that come in from our school. But how often throughout the rest of the school year are we thinking about engaging, not just trying to get those families to come into the church, but how are people from our churches going into the school? And we're going to talk about the importance of that. I was in a church in San Jose, California, 2 weeks ago, doing a very similar presentation, although it was a day-long outreach, what we call an outreach training, and we were focusing in on outreach to their preschool. They have a preschool that's attached to their church. It's small, but they have a tremendous mission opportunity. A lot of young families that are in that preschool, 27 families to be exact. On the flip side, the congregation itself has an average worship attendance of 65 people on a Sunday, and their average age is 70 or older. Which is not uncommon for the churches that we work with and that we serve, and it's pretty common too within our Lutheran networks as well. It's basically the graying of the church. Our churches are getting older and older and older, and oftentimes are very much disconnected from our schools. And so during this session, one of the ladies from the church came up during a break, and we hadn't really gotten very far into it, but I had started talking about a key thing we're going to talk about today, which is relationships. And she came up to me and she said, you know, I really, really want to understand what you're saying about the importance of outreach, but how on earth could we ever reach those families when they don't come to worship on Sunday? It was an interesting day after that, right? Because our mindset and our worldview is on the church side of things. You all come. You come to us. And we're going to talk about some ways to flip that thinking. But first, in your notes, if you're following along, and we're going to do we'll have a lot of time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, maybe just jot them down in your notes, and then Todd and I will do all the questions at the end. In your notes, let's talk a little bit about some of the macro, what we call macro or big picture issues that are facing the church today. What we find when we work with churches, and we've worked with churches of all different denominations, but when it comes to this church and school combo, they are mostly all Lutheran churches. But we find that there are a lot of silos. In fact, we were just talking about that, where we're just siloed. The church is the church, and the school is the school, and it's kind of like never the two shall meet, except maybe for the Christmas pageant, right? And so we have these silos that they've just evolved over time. We have the roller coaster of things that are changing in our world today and our culture. Everything that we know about the world even 10, 15 years ago is very different today. Everything that we know about families, family units, mental health, even physical well-being, and our jobs and vocations is all very different today. So we've kind of been like on this roller coaster. Our churches have been on roller coasters of kind of up and down of being effective and ineffective. We have issues around space. A lot of churches with big buildings, and many of you may be in churches like this where maybe 15 or 20 years ago you had classrooms that were full Monday through Friday. Anybody could say that, where they had like classrooms that were full and now they're just not, or you've seen a decline? And and things are changing, right? So we're dealing with these space issues too. Like, well, now what do we do if we have space? Is anybody out of space for their preschool? Wow, that's amazing. Or preschool and school. That's fantastic. How many of you have waiting lists? Wow, that's even better. Well, we might actually learn some more from these. We're going to maybe flip this at the end, and you're going to maybe tell us how this is happening, because we don't always see that. What we see is a lot of empty buildings. We see a lot of churches that have scaled back in the grade levels that they're able to offer, and now over the last few years that they've had to do that, they have a lot of open space, and so they don't know what to do with it, and they don't know how to restart. Where do they start to add back those grades, or what does early childhood development look like in a church that's trying to fill that space in? The other big issue that we're dealing with is now the United States is the third largest mission field in the world, behind China and India. If any of you have been around our ministry or heard other presentations, you may have already heard that. So by population, the population of the United States continues to increase. The church's ability to reach those people is what? Decreasing. And that's just not our research at Church Doctor Ministries. That's research that you can read from the Barna organization, the Pew organization, Gallup, and the surveys that they do. So we're living on this mission field. And a lot of these things that have happened in our world have caused this disruption, right? And this disruption in our world, everything from COVID to our government issues. We're not going to get into any of that and name them, but our issues with and challenges with our government, issues around shootings and gun safety and crime. All of these things over the last few years have created a lot of disruption in our society. And from this disruption, we have a lot of hopelessness. We have a lot of, maybe you're experiencing in this in your school settings too, where maybe there just seems like some of the families sometimes maybe even carry some extra burdens with them of hopelessness, and they're just not quite sure, what's going to happen next, kind of a feeling. We kind of went through that the last 2.5 years. What's going to happen next? What's going to be the next thing that causes a challenge in our life? So what happens from that disruption, though, is that receptivity to God and spiritual matters actually increases. Unfortunately, that does not translate to more people going to church. So there are more people who are interested in God and spiritual matters and learning about that than they are about just going to church. And so what do we do with this kind of disruption, and how does this impact families, and what does it mean for you, for your church and school? So let's talk about then kind of the current state of schools and outreach. So earlier I talked about how things are somewhat siloed still. I won't ask you, but just kind of think about that. You don't have to raise your hands in case maybe you're sitting next to someone who's from your church and maybe doesn't feel the same way. But just think about that, how the relationships are between your church and your school right now. Has there been drift where maybe the church was really excited about having a school? They knew it was a mission opportunity. They knew it could be something that could be for effective outreach, but you've drifted away from understanding the purpose of that school. One of the questions that we get asked almost in every single church that we work with, how do we get more young people? So remember that age demographic, we have aging congregations. We always get this question, how do we reach more young people and get them active and involved in our church? On the flip side of that, we have churches that have schools that have young people in them. And so what's very strange is when you kind of hold the mirror up to those folks and say, you actually have an opportunity to reach young people and families and to get them engaged in matters of faith. And all you have to do is kind of either walk down the sidewalk or walk down the hallway to do it. Your mission field today for your church isn't over there, or isn't, when you put the little dot on the map and draw the circle and do your zip code analysis. Your mission field, for those of you, and I'm assuming you have some type of a school or a preschool, or you wouldn't be in this room, that is your mission field. And so when people say, how do we reach young people, you have maybe some of those older folks in the congregation who are kind of, thinking about the good old days when we used to have packed Sunday school classrooms and confirmation and catechism classes and all of that, and those days have passed, but they're really not even looking at what's right down the hall or right down the sidewalk. And they don't even know how to build that bridge of those relationships. So this is the reality that we're living in today. This mission field and these questions, why aren't they, just like that woman who said, why aren't they coming to church? When really the question is, how are we going to them, right? How are we going, and what does it take for us to go to those families? Because Jesus said what? Go make disciples, right? This is kind of the as you are going piece. As you are going about your life, go and make disciples. And you don't have to go very far. So we're going to talk about these mission principles here. Principle number 1 in your notes is meeting a felt need. In our research through COVID, when we first started to being able to get back to doing interviews and kind of the way we would use our system for consultations, we would ask the parents that had children in the schools and the preschools, why are you here? Why do you have your child in this Christian environment? And there were 3 things that they said that were their key reasons. It was a healthy environment, it was a secure environment, and it was a safe environment. And I'm going to unpack what that means and why this ties into meeting a felt need. It was healthy because at the time of COVID, in their minds, a Christian school was healthier, it was cleaner, it was safer because it wasn't as big in some cases, right? So it was more of still that pandemic bubble that we've heard so much about, right? And so they wanted that healthy environment for their kids. They wanted a secure environment. Why? School shootings, crime, issues like that people were afraid. They thought in the public school system that something horrific and traumatic was maybe more likely to happen than it would in a church. Now, we also know that there are times when that's happened in churches, and so it's very equally horrific and tragic when it happens anywhere. But in their minds, being in a church for school seemed to be more secure. There was kind of this idea of this thinking. And then safe. Now, the safe part was really interesting because that really doesn't tie to the secure part that I just talked about. The safe part was that it was a safe place for their kids not to be influenced by culture. They weren't going to hear about strange things about gender and social issues that maybe they didn't want their 3 and 4 and 5-year-old to hear about, or even their 3rd or 4th grader to hear about, right? So it was a safe space where their kids could get a good quality education, but they weren't going to have to be influenced by the culture of today. And that's kind of where we refer to kind of that woke piece. I don't want to get into that too much because that can mean, a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But the key part is that meeting this felt need, the felt needs of the parents, healthy, secure, and safe. And so what are some of the things around meeting a felt need? Well, first of all, this is what missionaries do. Missionaries are taught to meet the felt needs of the people that they're trying to reach. So think about those things that I just shared, and think about that from the missionary perspective. Healthy, secure, safe. Do you know, gets into some of the mission tactics, do you know the families in your school from a missionary perspective? Do you know their needs beyond just making sure their child has a good quality education? Do you know about their family background? Do you know what's important to them? And things like, even how you think about enrollment into your schools. Think about it this way. Think about meeting felt needs and what would Jesus do. So in many of our schools, we put the priority kind of like on who gets in to church families first, which makes sense, right? We want to make sure that we're providing this, for the families that are already in our church. And then sometimes we jump right to other Christian families, and we put unchurched families third on the list. And we really don't think about the mission opportunities to reach those unchurched people. We also don't think about meeting felt needs in the community where your school might be able to create a niche or an area of focus that might not be happening in your community right now. So in communities that have a lot of cross-cultural, they have different people groups. It could be even things like English as a second language for parents, those types of things. It could be around how do children assimilate if they've come from a different cultural background with parents that have a different culture than maybe what they're growing up in and experiencing now in the United States. So are you meeting those felt needs from that missionary perspective? Is there a niche in your school that you can really focus in on and become known for that? It could also be as simple as creating a focus around music education as an extracurricular type activity. A lot of public school systems are doing away with things like music and art and some of the things that we all grew up with. You could have, as your extra classes that you could take, art class or music class or band or choir or whatever it might be. But there's a niche in some places where, depending on, again, the gifts and the skills, resources, if that's something that would be available to you, that you could actually create a niche around being known for being a Christian school that also has a really quality music program or a quality art program, those kind of things. So think about how your enrollment, where you're putting the emphasis on reaching unchurched people, and how you are maybe creating some niches to develop in your school that you can be known for in your community that might be meeting some needs. Also think about just the mission training. This idea of reaching the kids and the families that are in your schools isn't just something that's the pastor's job. We're going to talk about the pastor at the very end here. So for those of you who are pastors in the room, maybe you want to leave now. But we're going to talk about you later. But this is a team effort, meaning all of the teachers, all of the aides, all of the church staff, all of the pastors that are on staff, if you're blessed to be able to have multiple pastors, all of the church members who are part of your church see themselves as part of this missionary worldview to reach the families that are in the school. No one gets out of helping with this, okay? And this is really important because we have, unfortunately, because of this drift that we've experienced in a lot of our schools, where we find churches where the teachers might have all of the curriculum and certification that's required by the state, but they don't go to church. We've been in schools where, unlike these classrooms that are just covered, and you definitely know this is a place of Christianity and a place that values and loves Jesus and those relationships, they don't have a picture of Jesus on the wall. It's not part of that school. It's not part of who they are. We were doing a walking tour in one church, and I looked down and there was a CD player on one of the tables, and it was close to Christmas time. And I picked up one of the CDs because we're just kind of looking to see what the music was that the kids were listening to. And on the very top was the Madonna Christmas album. And I'm not talking about the Catholic Madonna. I'm talking about Vogue Madonna, okay? I don't know how she used to do that, but I'm from Ohio, so I go OHIO. But anyway, so go Bucks. So it was, and there she was, Madonna in all her young glory. I don't know if you watched the Grammys last week or not, but you know, she kind of caught some flack for the way she looks today. But this CD, and it was all secular Christmas music. And it wasn't very appropriate to be in a kid's classroom. So, but why was that? Well, because a lot of the teachers that were in that school had absolutely no faith relationship whatsoever. And I know and this is where this training piece comes in. I know it's hard to find teachers today, anywhere. It's hard to find teachers today, right? But if you don't have that as a priority for your school, that your teachers and the aides and the volunteers and the people who are helping be in those classrooms, if that's not a priority or even a requirement that they be Christian and have some type of Christian faith, they don't have to go to your church, but they need to have some type of a Christian connection, an active relationship with Jesus. Because if they don't have that, and if they're not willing to be trained as missionaries, then how are they ever going to reach the kids? And then how are they ever going to reach the families? And remember, this is a team effort here. So I don't want to beat up on any teachers or any, I know, again, we recognize it's very hard, but you need to hold on to those standards and get that mission training as a team effort, remove those silos, and really think about how you're reaching those families. And then think about what the purpose is of your school. So what we recommend is that every church and school have what we call a philosophy of ministry document that explains kind of the vision, mission, and purpose of the church and the vision, mission, and purpose of the school, and how those two entities come together to reach lost people for Jesus. And that's really, really important because the purpose of your school shouldn't be income to help balance the budget, to help pay the bills, or just, things like, well, when we ask the question, why do you have a preschool? Well, we started it, 30 years ago, and we just keep doing it, but there's really no connection to the church. Or some of my favorite ones are, well, we started the preschool, and then it got so big, and we didn't really want to have, that much to do with it anymore. So now they just rent our facilities. They're their own separate nonprofit, and they kind of just do their own thing. That's not really the purpose to have a facility and to have a school. Yep.
Yeah. So that purpose statement is different from like a vision. Like in my brain, sitting where you are listening to what Tracee just said, I'm thinking, oh, okay, so I need to write out a vision statement and a mission statement and go through that whole process. The purpose statement is incorporates some of that, but it's different. It's more of a narrative as to two things. Why has God placed us here? And maybe even more importantly, to get to that purpose statement, what would my community miss if we didn't exist at this time?
Yes.
That holds both sides. So it isn't, when Tracee said vision, it isn't those statements, but it's another narrative that, we don't
meld it together.
A whole 6-page thing. It's
no.
Maybe a couple of paragraphs or one, but just so it's a clear explanation as to what's the purpose of your ministry, and we always like to say, what would our community miss if we didn't exist today?
Yep. Yeah, this is not a big thing, but as Todd said, it's not like a big document, and don't spend years trying to get it put together. 3 or 4 paragraphs, something that really solidifies and defines why you have a school and why it matters to your church and why it matters to the community. Okay?
We have a webinar on that.
And we have a webinar on creating that philosophy of ministry. See Katie later, she'll tell you all about it. Mission principle number 2, and this is a formula that we use to help people understand more effective outreach. And it starts with presence plus proclamation plus persuasion equals Great Commission discipleship. So let me unpack that. Presence, proclamation, and persuasion. So the presence piece of this is basically your building, right? You have a building, you have a facility, that is your church. And you have this visible entity of your faith in your community. That's being present. That's your church building, the fact that you have a church on the corner of Main and Baker Street, okay? So you are present in that community. And as Lutherans, we do exceptionally well with buildings. At least, we are very blessed and fortunate with the resources and the buildings, facilities that we have. We also do really well with proclamation, which is our preaching and teaching. We have some extraordinary, not just some, we have a lot of extraordinarily well-trained, theologically sound preachers and teachers in our churches today. And we're very, very committed to that proclamation, getting that gospel message out for it to be heard. What we're not very good at, though, anymore, is the persuasion part of this equation. And the persuasion part are the relationships. We are not very good at building relationships. Those one-on-one, meeting those felt needs, getting to know those families, getting to know what's happening in their lives. We are, especially on the Lutheran side, with our potlucks, really good at relationships internally for those who show up at our church, right? But how often do you really see, or are they even invited, families from your school if they're not already active in your church? So if you have a new family that comes into your church or your school, are they really welcomed into that church relationship? And do they know how to get connected? So we're not really good on that persuasion side. So that's where some of the things that, as Todd talked about with that philosophy of ministry, and some of the things that we do where for some reason on the church side, we're really good at, with the preaching and the teaching and the sharing of the gospel, Bible studies, all of that stuff to build those relationships in our church. But when it comes to the school, we get kind of paralyzed by fear of, well, can we say that? Can we talk about that? Even though we're a Christian school, can we really talk to the parents? Okay, maybe we know we can talk to the kids about Jesus, but I don't know if we could talk to the parents about Jesus. And why is that? Well, because we haven't done enough to build those relationships. And we're going to talk a little bit more about receptivity too. But do you have a question? Yeah.
I was just going to ask, is there a difference between what is the difference between presence and persuasion then? If I might say one more.
Yeah.
Because it seems like in order to have persuasion, you need to have more of a, I guess, physical presence besides just the nice building.
Right. Yeah. So in this formula, from the missionary formula, presence is your visibility. That there's people know that you're a Christian. They know that you have a church. They know that there is this entity that is a faith community. You are present there. Yeah. On the persuasion side, though, that's more relational. So the persuasion is more of the feeling of it, of having that relationship. They feel a connection. Yeah, if you want to open that door, because it's going to get warm. I don't want you guys to be like falling over, unless it's the Holy Spirit, and then we're all good with that. But if it's just the heat. See, we should be competing with Asbury to see if we could get a little revival happening here this week. Anyway, maybe that was a bad joke, but it's just the heat, really. I'm just like, it's hot up here. Anyway, but so does that answer your question as far as think about that more of a feeling piece on the persuasions, and we're going to talk a little more about what that means too, as far as receptivity goes. Sure. So then mission principle number 3, training everyone to get involved in basic missionary tactics and to think like a missionary. So the word missionary means sent one. And we read this in Scripture in John 20:21, where we read, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." We are all sent people on a mission from God. And if I had my sunglasses, I would put them on and say we're all kind of like the Blues Brothers right now, right? We are all, you guys remember that movie? It's Jake and Elwood. We're on a mission from God. We are all sent people on a mission from God. And so think about it this way. And if you're a preschool teacher, you can do this with kids, or if you lead VBS, and maybe even if you have your seniors Bible study, I would love for you to do this next week too when you get home. So I want everybody to put your hands out like this in front of you. Make a fist. Thumbs out. Thumbs up. Okay, and we're going to, on the count of 3, don't do it yet. When I get to 3, we're going to say, I'm a missionary, and I want you to do what I do. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. I'm a missionary. Okay, let's do it one more time. So, hands out, thumbs up. 1, 2, 3. I'm a missionary. Teach that to every single person, from your 2-year-old all the way up to your 90-year-old. Every single person in your church and school is a missionary on a mission field. And yes, if you have to yell at them like that, that's fine. So and even, to the point where if you just want to encourage people to do that, every morning when they wake up in front of the mirror, maybe they want to do the hand gestures and all of that, but just train your people in the school, your school team, staff, your church, your members, to understand that they are missionaries, and then help them to understand things like, well, then if I'm a missionary, what gifts has God given to me to help me be a missionary on a mission field? And so think about, what are some of the gifts, if you guys do like spiritual gifts inventories or assessments, have all of your folks go through that with the idea of how can we use the gifts that God has already placed in our church for our entire church to be missionaries to reach the families that are in the school. So you see, you're going to train your people in the church to think differently, to understand who God has made them to be with their gifts, and then how does that translate into reaching families in the school. And one of the things that Todd and I talked about earlier today, we were kind of going through this presentation, that we really want to make sure you understand, is that as much as, and God can do anything, so I don't want to discount this, as much as I really would love for you to be able to walk out of these doors today and go back and, on Monday or Tuesday when you get back into your churches and schools, be able to flip a switch and have all of these things work, these are not silver bullet things. This is where building relationships, even in your church, doing some preaching and teaching and sharing about some of these mission principles, maybe even having a training session, whether you do one that we do, or you even create one for yourself. But think about just how you can get people thinking differently and understand that it's not going to happen overnight. So please don't, now the missionary thing you can do, right? I'm a missionary, and get everybody that's kind of a cute little way of getting people to start to think differently. But also understand that if this is not part of the culture of your church already, it's going to take some time. Because when you go back to your church and start telling people on kind of the church side of things that, hey, we're going to create some opportunities and some experiences for you to learn how to connect with the families in our school, they're probably going to freak out a little bit, okay? The other part of this too is, in the next principle, is also to be prepared for parental challenges. Mission and ministry is messy, and it's, if you've been in ministry at all for the last 4 or 5 years, even before the pandemic, things were getting a little hectic and crazy in the world of the church and school and in general, and getting quite messy for families. So here's the thing. The felt needs that existed maybe 20 or 30 years ago when you started your school are very different today. The family units and structures that we have today are very different than they were 20 years ago. You think about divorce rates, you think about marriage, and you have halves and steps and extended families. We also are living in this odd kind of multi-generational time where there are grandparents who are now taking care of their grandkids because there's some issue with the parents where they can't take care of those kids anymore. And so the people that are showing up for drop-off with a 4 or 5 year old might be 65 years old, and they're the primary caretaker. So that type of ministry and mission and outreach is going to look very different for them. And then also be prepared for questions that come. We were also talking about, kind of joking around, that the church today isn't your grandfather's church. And so, and especially as Lutherans, and I was born and raised in a Lutheran church in Southern Ohio, rural setting, very conservative, 5 generations, until I went to the Ohio State University. I had no idea there was really anything else besides being a Lutheran, right? It's not like that today. Our Uber driver last night, who was from Brazil, was quoting the Bible and telling us all about the stuff that she had learned when she was a young child, but how she's moved away from that because of different things that had happened in her family and tensions with the church. And so now, she's kind of in the God is love category of which she thinks is Christianity, and we're kind of like, that's nice, but not really, but that's her experience now, right? People have a lot of questions, and so you need to be prepared if you're going to kind of step out into this missionary lifestyle of being sent people. Have some systems in place to help answer some of those challenging questions, like things about marriage, things about gender. And it can't all go back to just the pastor. This is part of this training. What is our church's view? And it doesn't have to be divisive. It doesn't have to be something that causes unrest to have these conversations. But that's where the relational piece comes in. Train your folks on how they can have these kind of conversations and answer the challenging questions that unchurched parents have today, and understand that family unit looks very, very different. Number 7, the mission principle it's actually mission principle number 5. Developed a mission-trained core support team. And this is a kind of a core support team. How many of you have like a board of directors for the school, for your school, or kind of like your school board and how many of you would say that those folks, they're more administrative? They take care of finances and budget. Okay, is that like their role? How many of you have boards that are actively involved in the activities of the school? Okay, that's good? Actually, that's good, because what we also find is that for schools that have boards, they're mostly administrative. They're there to help balance the budget or do reviews of teachers and those kind of things. So if you don't have any of that in place, think about this on the church side of things, to create some type of a core support group that's for the school, that's from your church. And that just provides an extra layer of support for the teachers and the staff. It becomes another way for them to help to build relationships and to have some other connections to the church. And we'll talk about how to utilize those folks, because in our next principle number 6, this is where I get to draw, on the board, the whole family is the target for ministry. So, it used to be, I'm left-handed, so bear with me, I'll move out of the way once I get this done. But, okay, so we have the child, right? And that's kind of like our core focus. And then we've got this outer ring, and we have the parents. And so that's kind of yesterday's thinking, right? We just have, this is kind of our standard family unit for who we're trying to reach with the school and outreach to them. Today, we have the child, we have parents. Oh, I didn't leave myself enough room for today. And we have grandparents. And you'll get the idea. I'll do it down at the bottom. And then we have extended family. And then we have an even bigger circle that's just our friends. I'm going to talk about why this matters. So the whole family unit is our target. I don't mean to use that in a weird way, but what you're thinking about now as you think about reaching people, it's not just that you're going to reach the child with the excellent curriculum and solid Christian education, and it's not just that you're going to reach the parents by building some core relationships with them, but today you have a huge mission field. Why? So let's say even if it's someone from your church, child is baptized in your church, parents are members of the church, maybe even the grandparents. Let's say one set of grandparents is from your church. So let's say you're lucky you got like 3 generations, which is very rare to find in one church today. But you also have a second set of grandparents somewhere who may or may not be church people, right? Because you can't necessarily rely on the fact that these two spouses, these two parents, came from Christian homes. And then when you go to the extended family, those folks are probably not all in your church, right? And so when you think about different events and activities, so sometimes, we limit ourselves to, let's get the child, let's get the parents, well, then if we get the grandparents, that's a bonus. But think about extended family. Those folks are probably unchurched people, highly likely, because we know statistically that it's never going to be 100% of these people are going to be church people. And then this out here, all of these people have friends. And we know it's very likely that over 75% of the friend network of the family that's in your church is unchurched. Now you may be saying, well, why does that matter? Right? You're probably wondering, anybody wondering that? Like, why are we going off this? Okay, you all get this? Because what happens, you provide quality education to the child, Christian education, you're reaching the parents, you reach the grandparents, they have those relationships, that piece of that building of those relationships. What are those folks all going to do? What are they going to talk about when somebody says, how is it that you guys don't seem to be like the stressed out parents and grandparents that we always are? Oh, well, because we go to a really great church and school, and they provide this, this, and this, and we're part of this network and this community, and they really support us. And so what you're doing is this, you're actually building in, without even knowing it, a mission network that's right inside all of these rings. So when you target the whole family unit and for all of your ministry, I'm going to trip over that for sure. You actually extend your mission field, and then you don't have to do things like put the pin in the map and draw the circle or do the zip code survey or so, because think about what you have and all of those people right there that are now part of the mission field of your church. Why? Because they're all connected to your school. Also, think about your whole church family as the agent for mission and creating a movement in your church. Think about how you can build relationships with the people who are in the school. Think about things like what happens at drop-off and pickup time. Is that just something that the teachers and the aides are involved in? Or do you invite people from the church to participate in that? Do you have open houses where you invite people from the church to come? Now, I know many of you maybe have done this, and many of you tried this, and maybe it didn't work out very well. Maybe no one from the church came. Well, why? Because they're still living in this silo mentality. They don't understand that that invitation to come to that open house is an invitation to be sent as a missionary to that mission field that's in that school. And on that night, they can be a missionary to reach those families, those extended families, and those friends that show up to check out the school. And so create this attitude and this environment where you are going to them. Don't allow and don't be like that wonderful woman who had the best intentions in San Jose who said, how can we reach these people when they don't come to church? Go to them. Why? Because you're the missionaries, you're the sent people. Okay? And then there's a couple things I'm going to group together here. One is this mission principle number 8, and it gets to receptivity. And I know it says in here in these notes, and this was actually Kent's part of the presentation anyway, it says in here, if a family visits worship, then send 2 trained church members out, make a short visit to the home, provide welcome gifts, and try to build that relationship. Now I know that might be challenging to think about doing home visits. How many of you still do home visits as part of your, okay, a few of you still do. This is something that I would recommend that you do once you've spent some time building some relationships and you understand some receptivity. So it could be that they show up at worship, or it could be that they start to come to some of your other ministry events and activities and those types of things. But learn to understand the receptivity of that family and then decide, okay, are we going to try to do a home visit, or maybe we're going to try to take them out to coffee, or maybe we're going to take them out to dinner, those kind of things. One of the things that we recommend a church do, and this is another strategy, and we talk about this, and this is actually in the PDF that's available called Igniting the Mission. There's a lot of details. Look up the grandparent. If you don't read anything else in this, look up the grandparent strategy, because that will tell you all the details. I'm going to cover it very quickly. But basically, the grandparent strategy is this. All of you have older folks in your church who are grandparents, right? And probably the majority of them have grandkids that maybe live far away. They don't get to see them all the time, right? But they love the idea of being a grandparent. And so what you can do is, again, training them on how to be missionaries. Ask for people who would want to be involved in your grandparent ministry to the school. And then through a little bit of training on how to build relationships and some other mission training, you assign a child to the grandparent. So I'm just going to use Todd as an example, even though he's not a grandparent yet that he knows of. So Todd, so let's say Todd's a grandparent. He's a young guy though. He's like way far away from that. But so let's say Todd is a grandparent in his church, but his grandkids live far away. but he loves being around kids, and he wants to, still have, some of that connection. And his school has an opportunity. They say, hey, Todd, you know what? We're going to start this grandparent ministry. Would you be interested? And here's what we would like for you to do. Show up once a week, and let's say Todd's retired. We'll do a lot of like stereotyping of Todd right now. He's a retired guy, has some free time on his hands during the week. A Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, he's, thinking about either his golf game or something else that he's going to be doing, but he has time. So we say, hey, Todd, if you're part of our grandparent strategy, one of the things would be, we'd love for you to be part of our Wednesday morning drop-off time. Can you, pick up a box of donuts and, a box of coffee from Dunkin' and show up at 8 o'clock, whatever your time is. Show up at 8 o'clock and just greet the parents. And we've got Katie. No, I won't use Katie because we'll use a boy. What's your name? Kevin. Oh, Katie, Kevin. Okay. Anyway, that's fun. So we've got, Kevin. His son is going to be there, and so can you connect with Kevin and his son Joey every Wednesday morning, and just look for him and just kind of introduce yourself. Make sure Kevin's got a high stress job. Make sure he's got a donut and a cup of coffee as you send him off, and the teacher will be there to take Joey into the classroom. So what you're doing then is you're automatically introducing Todd to Kevin, keep on my name straight, Todd to Kevin, right, as the dad, and then Joey also understands that Todd is around, and so maybe at a different day of the week, or maybe once a month, Todd comes in when it's chapel time, or it's a special reading time, and Todd becomes a reader for this special time. And so Joey knows that when Todd comes in, he's his person, right? Besides the teacher, he gets to build a relationship with Joey. Maybe there's it could be anything, that fits. So maybe some special tutoring time or reading time or Bible study time that Todd gets to have with Joey. And so there's this relationship, then this kind of bond that's starting to form. But then there's also this bond that's starting to form because every Wednesday, Todd's out there shoving a donut and a cup of coffee in Kevin's hand, whether he wants it or not. And he's going to get to know a lot more. And so you're doing this very relational kind of bridge building where you're going to start to then have more deeper conversations, deeper relationships, and those types of things are going to start to happen. And so then that's where this whole idea of maybe doing a home visit would come into play, where then instead of making that something that the teacher does or the pastor does, or maybe it's something they can do together, Todd is also trained that maybe he stops by Kevin's home and delivers the gift, or he notices when Kevin and his family show up at worship and Todd makes a beeline over there to welcome that family into worship. And so this grandparent strategy engages the older folks that are in your church, and those folks who say things like, well, I'm too old. Right? We all have people who say that they're too old to do these things. Well, you're not too old. And maybe some people, maybe they are, to show up with a cup of coffee and a donut and hand it off, to a guy that's going off to a crazy day at work and then walking their kid into school, right? And all of that's happening where? Right on the mission field that's already your church and your school. You didn't have to go to the homeless shelter or a third world country or anything like that to do this type of mission work. Okay, so check out the grandparent strategy. If you're interested in that, let me know, and we can do a webinar for your church and preschool or school to set that up. One of the things that you might get questions about and pushback when you get into the grandparent strategy is things like background checks. Do whatever you need to do for that, especially if they're going to be in the classroom. All of you guys know this, you're professionals. You know more, you're the experts, know more about this than I do. Each state is different, so in some states, it depends on the amount of time. So if Todd's only there for 45 minutes, maybe he doesn't have to have a background check. If he's there for an hour, in some places, he has to have a background check. Do whatever, and I know this because this has happened several times. As soon as we say things like, we're going to get the church folks involved in the school more, then it's like, whoa, wait a minute, background checks, yes, that's fine. Do it, even if it costs you money. That's a wise investment, and it's an investment in the mission and ministry to help grow your church and to build those relationships. So don't let that be like a thing. And if something comes out, you handle it discreetly. If Todd, whatever, Todd's done, if you can't make it through a background check, fine, fine. Now we're all going to be Googling Todd. That's Stocker. But, find something else for Todd to do then. He doesn't have to be in the grandparent ministry. But don't let those things be a reason that stop you from engaging what probably you have already, which is this great resource of active older adults in your congregation who could do something that would be really beneficial for the families that are in your school. And then principles 9 and 10 kind of combined together there as I put this presentation together about being trained to take prayer requests and then respond in prayer, and doing that so that you can make sure that, one of the things that we do in our churches is that we create really long prayer lists, right? I mean, if you still do like bulletins or you have prayer chains and stuff like that, you have all these names that are on there, all these people that you're praying for, and you never really, depending on the size of your church, maybe you don't even know who those people are or what you're really praying for. You've just got, Bob and John and Katie and Todd for his running with the law and whatever it is that's on that list. You don't know what, yeah. But when you're thinking about this again from that mission-minded perspective and building those relationships, so if Todd's in the grandparent ministry and he shows up on Wednesday and Kevin comes in and that's okay, keep looking at your phone. And Kevin comes in, he kind of, gets Joey out of the car and he's really exasperated by the whole thing, and he just looks frazzled. Todd will be trained enough to say, hey, Kevin, how's it going this morning? What's going on? And through that relationship, Kevin may share something with Todd. My wife and I just got a huge bill for the house. We got to have a new roof. We don't have the money. It's going to be, her hours have been cut. I'm not making as much because I'm not selling as many cars or whatever it is Kevin does. And he shares all this stuff with Todd. So what we normally would say, because we're the nice Christian folks that we are, okay, yeah, boy, I'm sorry about that, Kevin. Well, I'll pray for you. And then we walk away. Oh, here's your donut. And then we walk away, right? Teach Todd to say, hey, Kevin, I've been there. I know what that's like. And I remember that time when my wife and I were stressed out with finances and the kids were young. And he can say, can I just pray for you? And then train Todd to just say, can I pray for you? Can I approach? Okay. And then just pray for Kevin right there in the parking lot of the church. That will start an amazing movement of prayer and spiritual health and vitality. If you train people like Todd to do that with the parents, whether they're from your church or not, just do it. Because God's going to honor that and bless that. And then what's going to happen? A couple weeks of Todd doing that with Kevin. Kevin's going to jump out of the car one morning, run over to Todd, give him a big hug, and say, Todd, you're never going to guess what happened. I just got a huge bonus, and when you prayed, and God answered, so tell me more about how do we keep doing that, right? Maybe that's a little exaggerated, but those things happen. But if Todd just walks away and puts Kevin's name on a prayer list somewhere, and it kind of gets lost in if we even do bulletins anymore, and nobody even knows who Kevin is, that's not really going to start that kind of spiritual movement in your church. And it's not really going to help you build those relationships with somebody like Kevin who may be far away from God or wondering if prayer works at all. So make prayer part of this too. Teach your people how to ask for prayer requests as they get connected with these families, and then actually teach them how to pray. And then also teach Todd to use that as a God story report back to the church. So during your different ministry meetings, or if you want to take time to do this, sometimes churches do this during worship. Ooh, somebody turned the air on. Whew. Was somebody praying for that? There was an answer to prayer. Yeah, thank you. Todd's going to report back to the church his God story of how there's a preschool parent named Kevin who's going through a really challenging time. I've been praying for him. We prayed out in the parking lot, And God really did a work and is moving and working in Kevin's life. And I just wanted to share and report that God's on the move in the parking lot of the preschool. If your church hears that, what's that going to do for your church? How can we go out the parking lot and pray? Right? How can we be a part of that? How exciting is that to hear? How many times do you hear a God story like that? And maybe you guys already do some of this, but I know there are a lot of churches that don't. But just think about what that could mean for the spiritual temperature and some of the burdens that you're carrying about how do we reach young people? How do we reach these young kids? Well, you do it by going out in the parking lot and starting with, Kevin, here's a cup of coffee and a donut. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but that's how simple it can be for you. So teach people how to pray. And principle 11, keeping some records. This is updating the family on the resistance receptivity axis. Again, this was Kent's part. He's the theologian. So on page 12 of that Igniting the Mission document, it talks about this receptivity axis. Basically what this means is that for those of you who are on the school side of things, in your database of all of the things that you keep data on, start a place where you can take some notes, like where you do start to see some receptivity. Like maybe you hear from Todd that Kevin was receptive to prayer. Because maybe the first time Kevin shares a story and Todd says, "Can I pray for you?" And Kevin says, "No way, dude, I am not part of that. I just want to get Joey into class and I'm off." He's not really receptive. But maybe as Todd keeps building that relationship, building the relationship, still asking, how can I pray for you? How can I pray for you? And eventually, because Todd's going to wear Kevin down, right? I mean, this is persistence, right? We're to persevere. And so finally, Kevin's going to say, okay, yep, here's something to pray for. And then, again, I'm not going to go rehash the whole story, but then maybe Todd reports that to you. What's your name? Tricia, who is the preschool director, and then she's got a little database of profiles where, Kevin, had some prayer time with Todd. He was more open to it. Seemed like it went well. Relationship building. And what you're doing is you're starting to track the receptivity of where your families are in that relationship. And so then you can kind of have some conversations where Tricia may go back to Todd and say, hey, you know what? The church is having the big fall potluck for the church. Can you invite Kevin and his family? He's already going to get an invitation anyway, but maybe you can invite him. And then if Kevin shows up with Todd and his family, then you make another note about that. They showed up at a church type activity, right? Instead of just coming to a school activity. So this whole idea of kind of tracking receptivity and understanding where these families are and then responding to that with one more thing and one more thing and one more thing as you're building that relationship. Principle 12, the unique role of the pastor. So how many pastors we have in the room? Because now we're getting ready to talk about you. Great, thanks for coming. Oh, thanks, Kevin. All right. Okay. Here's the first thing. And everything that I'm going to say as the pastor, I want you to don't think about this and don't hear what I'm going to say as like, oh, great, Tracy's giving me like 3 more things I got to do. I want you to think about this as, here are some other discipleship opportunities I have as a pastor and in my call as a pastor, some ways that I can disciple some others to help reach these church families, okay? So this isn't like a laundry list of, oh, now Pastor Kevin's got 3 more things to do. But think about this, who you can disciple. Host events like an evening with a pastor. One of my favorite things, it's a church in Southwest Ohio. They do pizza with the pastor. I love that. You can do, beers with the pastor or whatever it is. We're all Lutherans, so that flies here. But have some type of an evening with the pastor where they can meet with the families. Okay, and don't make it like an overly orchestrated, thing where it's too institutional, don't wear your jacket, wear your, and I do not want to offend anyone, don't wear your collar, don't wear, your Sunday church-going clothes, okay? Remember what Jesus did? He came looking like the people he was trying to reach, right? If Jesus were to walk into this room today, he'd be dressed like Kevin, you wouldn't, I don't want to elevate you to that status, right, Kevin? But, look like, you're a dad, you're a father, you're, somebody who can have pizza and a beer with a family, okay? But then when you do that, Kevin, invite a few other of your key leaders along with you when you do that. So your council president, your elder, somebody who's in charge of outreach, ministry, and bring that person with you so that as you're hosting this kind of small pizza with a pastor event, you're also discipling others in outreach and how to have conversations with those families. And so then at some point, you can actually then kind of turn that over to the outreach team. So then you become a guest, but maybe, what's your name? Nathan. Say Nathan's the council president. Maybe Nathan starts hosting pizza with the pastor. Pastor can still come, but then Nathan is actually hosting and meeting with the families and talking about the church and all of those kind of things. And so you use this as a discipleship opportunity within the church to build relationships with the families, but then also it does connect those families with the pastor who, interestingly enough, they may not see. The kids probably see the pastor more than the families do, right? They don't come to church, but this is an opportunity for that to happen. Have some what we call basic Christianity events. Maybe you do something like a vision night, not something that's a sermon during worship, because remember, these folks are probably not going to come to worship. But maybe have like a vision night or a purpose night where it is a church and school combined event, and the pastor shares a bit about why we have a preschool and why we value these children and why we value these families and what role this school plays in our church and how important that is. And it's an opportunity it's at a different time. It's not part of a sermon. It's not like, here comes Pastor Kevin beating us up again about this school on Sunday morning. But it becomes a very relational activity where the church and the school can come together and hear as a reminder about why this is so important for these two entities to be together and what that means to have that type of a community of faith. Also, pastors, think about, and I don't want to get into like approving curriculum, because I know, again, each state is different and you have curriculum plans and those kind of things that you need to follow, especially when you get into grade schools and those kind of things. But think about what type of materials are you providing to not just the kids, but in addition to that, what are some things that might be able to be sent home that speak to the parents in some very common language? Maybe if the kids are doing a devotion, or like all of those things that are on the wall. Katie and I were reading all the little Valentine's things that were on the wall out there. So the kids did that. But is there another type of a devotion activity that you could send home? Maybe the pastor can help provide some input where the child and the family can do it together, but it's really something that the family or the parents or the grandparents are going to really connect with. It's not just a cute craft and a letter that's like, those things are all great, but think about, are there other things that you can do to introduce Christianity to the families? There's a bonus principle on here, and I'm going to actually not talk about this because I want to leave time for Todd, about charging everyone the tuition and charging everyone the same amount. One of the things that we find that becomes a stumbling block that contributes to the silos for outreach is unfortunately tuition, because in a lot of our church and school combinations, we do sometimes these very complicated, confusing things with tuition, where if you're part of the church, you get this, and if you're not, if you're active here, then you get that, and then if you're not a church person, then it's, this kind of money. So figure out a way, if you can, financially to level that playing field, because what happens sometimes if we have all of these differing tuition levels is that, and unfortunately people just do this because this is how they think. They think, well, those people aren't paying as much as our church families are, or because we're reaching, inner city families, they can't afford it, and so we're, it's a discount or whatever, and so it becomes kind of this almost like infighting or a reason to not have certain families and demographic areas that you might be reaching as part of your church. So find some ways to charge everyone the same amount. If you need to do scholarships, and we can talk about that again too separately, because it's kind of a case-by-case basis depending on what you already have. But just think about, don't make tuition and finances a reason why you're thinking differently about a family or a people group that's in your, because that's not what Jesus would do, right? Okay? All right, so with that, I'm going to end. Todd, you want to share a little bit, and then we'll just do some open Q&A.